Imagine waking up to your normal, everyday routine, coffee brewing, the sun rising, your neighborhood slowly coming to life. But just a few blocks away, detectives are walking into what would become one of the most twisted crime scenes they've ever seen. Now here's the twist. Within hours, yes, hours, not days or weeks, these investigators would piece together a disturbing puzzle that even veteran detectives would call nightmarish. How did they do it? What did they see that no one else did? And why did this case shake the entire community to its core? If you're into real-life mystery, criminal psychology, and the brilliant moves law enforcement can make under pressure, stay with me. Because by the end of this story, you'll know exactly what happened. You're not just going to hear about the case. You're going to feel like you're right there, standing beside the detectives as they unravel one horrifying truth after another. Now, let me speak directly to you. I know what you're looking for. You saw the title, and you clicked because something in your gut told you this wasn't just any crime story. You want to know what really happened, how it all went down, and most importantly, how on earth they solved it so fast. You're not here for fluff, for filler, or for clickbait. You want the details, the emotions, the psychology, the turning points. You want to understand not just the crime, but the people behind it, the victim, the perpetrator, and the detectives who raced against time. And that's exactly what you're going to get. I promise you, this case will stick with you long after the video ends. So don't skip ahead or click away. Everything builds on the last moment, every detail connects to something bigger, and just when you think you've figured it out, we'll hit you with something you didn't see coming. It all started on a quiet Tuesday morning in a suburban neighborhood that looked just like any other on the surface. Tree-lined streets, front lawns perfectly trimmed, kids riding bikes, and neighbors waving at each other like they had for years. It's the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked, where you trust the person walking their dog past your house, where life feels safe, even predictable. That's what makes what happened here so chilling. Because monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they live right next door. Sometimes the scariest people wear the friendliest faces. The call came in around 8:47 a.m. A frantic voice on the other end told dispatch there was something off at the Simmons residence. The neighbor, an elderly woman named Martha, who'd lived on the street for over 30 years, said she hadn't seen Mr. or Mrs. Simmons in over 2 days. Their cars hadn't moved, the porch light had stayed on all night, and their dog, usually quiet, had been barking nonstop. She knew something was wrong. She didn't want to assume the worst, but her instincts told her this wasn't just a couple taking a spontaneous trip. Officers were dispatched for what was logged as a routine welfare check, but what they found was anything but routine. It was the kind of scene that changes how you look at life forever. When officers arrived and got no answer at the door, they peered through the front window. What they saw made them call for backup immediately. The scene was still, eerily so. No movement inside, no sign of life, except for that dog, now howling from the other side of the house. The front door was locked, but one of the officers noticed a side window cracked open just enough. With the neighbor's permission, they entered. What they discovered inside would become the centerpiece of a case that spiraled into something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. Blood. Not everywhere, but just enough to tell you something had gone terribly wrong. There were signs of a struggle in the living room, a shattered lamp, a coffee table turned over, and deep scratch marks on the hardwood floor like someone had been dragged. But there was no body in sight. The air was thick with silence and something else, something that made even the most seasoned officer hesitate. Upstairs, it was quiet too. Too quiet. The master bedroom looked almost untouched, except for a single detail that would later break the case wide open, a cell phone left on the bed, still recording a voice memo that had been going for nearly 40 minutes. And when detectives played it back, what they heard made their blood run cold. Here's where things take a turn. Within the hour, the lead detectives were called in, Detective Sarah Navarro and her partner, Detective James Whitmore. Both known for their sharp instincts and their ability to work seamlessly under pressure, these two had seen just about everything. But even they admitted later that this case was different. From the second they stepped inside the Simmons home, they felt something was off. Not just the scene, not just the missing persons aspect, but the atmosphere. It felt like the house itself was holding a secret, like it was trying to whisper the truth if only someone knew how to listen. That's what made Detective Navarro so good. She knew how to listen. Not just to people, but to the space, the silence, the things left unsaid. It didn't take long for the team to find a pattern in the chaos. A series of seemingly small details that didn't stand out at first glance. A framed photo on the wall turned slightly askew, a drawer pulled out just an inch more than the others, a receipt left on the kitchen counter for a gas station purchase, made only 12 hours earlier. These weren't just random details, they were breadcrumbs. And that's the beauty of this case. It's a masterclass in observation, deduction, and quick thinking. This wasn't a story that dragged on for weeks with dead ends and red tape. This was precision work. Within hours, the detectives not only identified the suspects, but pieced together a timeline that led them straight to a truth no one expected. But wait, before we get ahead of ourselves, here's something you need to understand. This case isn't just about what happened. It's about why it happened. And who made it happen. That's where the real twist lies. Because as the investigation unfolded, what began as a possible burglary gone wrong quickly morphed into something darker, deeper, and more calculated. There were layers to this crime. Layers that peeled back to reveal betrayal, manipulation, and a web of secrets that had been building for years. And the scariest part? The person behind it all never left town. In fact, they watched the entire investigation unfold from just a few doors away. If you've been following true crime, you know that the best stories aren't just about the crime. They're about the people. The psychology behind the decisions. The emotions that drive someone to cross a line that most of us never would. That's what this case delivers in spades. And here's the promise I made you earlier. You're going to get answers. Not vague speculation, not drawn-out drama, but real, solid answers. You're going to understand how detectives solved a seemingly unsolvable case faster than anyone thought possible. You'll get to witness the very moment the pieces clicked into place, the confrontation that no one saw coming, and the one clue that turned everything around. But to get there, we need to take a step back. We need to look at the Simmons family, their lives before everything changed, and the cracks that had been forming beneath the surface. We need to walk you through the crime scene, the investigation, the suspects, the motives, and the pivotal moment that turned this case from a local mystery into a national headline. And as we peel back each layer, you'll start to see the full picture, and trust me, it's darker and more twisted than anything you're expecting. So stay with me. Don't go anywhere. Because just when you think you've figured out who did it, I'm going to show you the move that changed everything. A masterstroke of detective work that even the most experienced investigators called unreal. And when you see what they uncovered and how fast they did it, you'll understand why this case is now taught in criminal justice courses as a textbook example of rapid response homicide investigation. And just when the detectives thought they had everything locked down, just when the suspect was cornered, the evidence lined up, and the confession seemed imminent, one unexpected message popped up on a discarded tablet buried under a pile of laundry. A message that changed everything. The tablet was old, dusty, and at first glance, completely irrelevant. It was wedged behind the laundry basket in the guest bedroom, powered off, ignored like it hadn't been touched in weeks. But something about it caught Detective Navarro's eye. Maybe it was the way it seemed too carefully hidden, or the fact that it wasn't listed in the inventory of digital devices taken from the house earlier that morning. Either way, once they powered it up and cracked the passcode, thanks to a sticky note found inside a kitchen drawer, they uncovered a flood of recent activity that didn't fit the image of the quiet, suburban life the Simmons family was known for. The browser history was strange. Searches related to property sales, background checks on local residents, even articles about how to detect hidden cameras. But the real shock came from a messaging app filled with cryptic conversations under a name no one in the family had ever mentioned before. Messages sent and received just days before the incident. One of them simply read, "It's almost done. Don't back out now." And just like that, what had appeared to be a random home invasion took on a whole new level of complexity. To understand how this all spiraled into chaos, we need to rewind just a few weeks. James Simmons was a software engineer, well-respected, quiet, not the kind of guy who raised any red flags. He worked from home, kept a predictable schedule, and mostly stayed out of the neighborhood spotlight. His wife, Laura, was a local art teacher known for her warmth and deep involvement in community events. To everyone who knew them, they were the picture of stability. No screaming matches, no wild parties, no known enemies. But as the detectives dug deeper, they began to uncover fractures beneath the surface, subtle but telling signs that something had shifted in the weeks leading up to the incident. James had started acting erratically, according to coworkers and a few concerned neighbors. He canceled several meetings at the last minute, stopped showing up at the local gym where he was a regular, and even skipped his best friend's birthday dinner, something he never would have done before. Laura, too, had become more withdrawn. A close colleague from a school said she'd been unusually emotional and even missed 2 days of work without explanation. When asked, Laura claimed she was dealing with a family emergency, but no one in her family seemed to know what she meant. There were whispers, rumors, really, of tension between them. Not loud or obvious, but there if you looked close enough. A forced smile in photos, a slightly colder tone in their text exchanges, a distance that hadn't been there before. And then there was the money. A forensic review of the couple's joint bank account revealed several large cash withdrawals starting around 6 weeks before the welfare call. Not enough to scream fraud, but enough to raise eyebrows. $800 here. $1,200 there. No corresponding purchases, no clear explanation. The detectives traced the ATM locations, and oddly, a few of the withdrawals were made across town, nowhere near where James or Laura typically went. One location in particular stood out, a rundown gas station just off the interstate, known locally as a late-night meeting point for everything from rideshares to shadier exchanges. When the footage was pulled, it showed James alone at the ATM at 2:17 a.m., nervously looking over his shoulder. Naturally, the detectives began to ask, who was he meeting? Was he being blackmailed? Was someone threatening him or Laura? Or, perhaps more chillingly, was he involved in something darker than anyone could have imagined? That's when the red herrings started to pile up. Because with every answer they found, 2 more questions seemed to surface. A former coworker mentioned James had recently rekindled contact with an ex-girlfriend from college, someone who had a reputation for getting involved in risky ventures. Another lead came from a neighbor, who swore he saw Laura arguing in hushed tones with a man who wasn't her husband late one night in front of their garage. The man never came inside, and the exchange lasted less than 5 minutes, but the neighbor couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't a casual conversation. Then there was the package. Delivered 2 days before the incident, signed for by James, but never opened. It was still sitting in the foyer when detectives arrived. Inside was a burner phone, still in its plastic wrap with no SIM card. When they ran the tracking information, they discovered it had been ordered from a vendor known to cater to clients who wanted their communications to stay off the grid. Why would James need a burner phone? Was he planning something? Or was he trying to protect himself from someone who already had him in their sights? Meanwhile, Laura's online activity raised its own set of alarms. In the days leading up to the incident, she had visited several online forums centered around psychological abuse and covert surveillance. She had bookmarked pages on restraining orders, data encryption, and how to detect hidden microphones. It was clear she felt threatened, or, at the very least, watched. But by who? And why hadn't she confided in anyone? Was she afraid of James? Or afraid for him? The list of potential suspects was growing, not shrinking, the ex-girlfriend. The mystery man at the garage. Even Laura's estranged younger brother, Daniel, who had a long history of petty crime and drug issues, and who had recently shown up at their door looking for help getting back on his feet. A visit that, according to texts found on Laura's phone, ended in an explosive argument. Daniel hadn't been seen or heard from in over a week. No known address. No working phone. But that didn't stop him from becoming a prime suspect, until his alibi checked out, confirmed by traffic camera footage placing him over 100 miles away during the critical window of time. The detectives were running out of suspects, but they weren't out of secrets. Because buried in the cloud storage linked to the tablet, a hidden folder was discovered. protected by a password and only accessible after recovering a string of deleted files that hinted at something much more personal. The folder was titled Plan B. What was in that folder? And why was it hidden so well? As Navarro and Whitmore began to unravel the contents, the entire tone of the case shifted. It wasn't just about who broke in or who disappeared. It was about who was playing who. Layers of manipulation, deception, and hidden motives began to emerge, and just as the detectives thought they were closing in on the truth, one chilling discovery made them question everything they thought they knew. Because tucked inside that digital folder, alongside financial spreadsheets, passwords, and personal logs, was a single video file time-stamped just 36 hours before the police were called. And what was on that video changed the direction of the case. Forever detectives Navarro and Whitmore stared at the screen as the video played. It was recorded in the Simmons living room, taken on the very same tablet that had nearly gone unnoticed. The angle was awkward, the footage a bit grainy, like it had been set up hastily, possibly by James himself. He appeared alone, pacing. His voice low, shaky, almost as if he knew this would be the last message he ever recorded. In it, he said something that made the air in the room feel heavier. If anything happens to me, it wasn't an accident. And it won't make sense right away, but you have to look at the contract. The one from 5 years ago. I shouldn't have signed it. I thought it was buried. I thought she forgot. That's all. No names, no clear details, just a vague reference to a contract and a cryptic warning about someone who apparently held power over him. And then the screen went black. No goodbye. No emotion. Just silence. The detectives exchanged glances, each of them knowing this case had just taken a sharp, unexpected turn. They went straight back to the crime scene and began tearing through every file cabinet, drawer, and storage box in the house. No contract. No trace of anything remotely resembling a legal agreement. Laura's files were mostly related to her job at the school, lesson plans, invoices for art supplies, parent-teacher communications. James' paperwork, though, was sparse, unusually so for someone with a history in software consulting and freelance project work. It was like he'd scrubbed his own footprint, but not well enough to escape suspicion. Still, the contract, whatever it was gone. And when the detectives tried to pull up archived records from James' past employers or freelance clients, they hit roadblocks. Files that should have been accessible were suddenly locked. Requests for access bounced back with strange, automated denials. One contact even emailed back directly, but instead of offering help, they sent a chilling message. Walk away. It's not worth what it'll cost you. That was the first warning. It wouldn't be the last. Later that night, while reviewing surveillance footage from a neighbor's doorbell cam, Whitmore noticed something that sent a ripple of concern through the entire team. A tall man in a dark hoodie had approached the Simmons house the night before the welfare check. He didn't knock, didn't ring the bell, just stood there, facing the door for nearly 3 minutes, motionless. Then he turned and walked away. The footage was time-stamped at 2:14 a.m. When enhanced, his face was still partially hidden, but his shoes were not. A very specific pair of sneakers, limited edition, custom laces, the kind only about 500 people in the state owned. Navarro knew exactly who wore them. Marcus Langley, James' former business partner. Langley was a name that hadn't come up until now, mostly because he'd disappeared from James' life years earlier after a messy falling out over a failed startup. They had built a cloud security app together that never launched publicly, but it attracted the wrong kind of attention. Rumor was, a third party had tried to acquire their app for purposes that weren't exactly ethical. James refused. Langley didn't. The partnership ended. No charges were filed, no lawsuits followed, but there were whispers that something darker had gone down. Navarro remembered an old forum post from years ago where someone claimed the app had been repurposed into surveillance software used by private clients overseas. It had all the red flags of a cover-up. When the detectives tried to contact Langley, they hit another dead end. No active phone, no social media, no recent credit activity. It was like he'd vanished or was being hidden. But before they could go deeper, something happened that made Navarro's gut twist. The tablet, the one with the video, the messages, the folder marked Plan B, was gone. Disappeared from the evidence locker overnight. No logs, no footage, no explanation. The entire precinct went on lockdown to investigate the breach, but the surveillance system for that wing had conveniently experienced a technical failure. The last footage showed a shadow moving across the hallway, just a blur. No face. No ID. It was clear someone didn't want that evidence to survive. Then came the second warning. Navarro received a package at her home. No return address. Inside was a flash drive. One file. A recording of her and Whitmore discussing the contract and Langley, inside their private squad room. Someone was listening. Watching. They'd bugged the precinct or hacked into their devices, and they wanted the detectives to know. The message was clear. Stop digging. But Navarro didn't back down. She knew they were close. And when she went back over the phone records again, something jumped out. Laura had made a 30-second call to an unknown number just hours before everything unraveled. A number registered to a name that hadn't appeared in any file so far. A woman named Lillian Hart. A therapist. But not just any therapist. She specialized in memory regression and trauma recovery, often working with clients trying to piece together repressed experiences. When Navarro tracked her down, Lillian was hesitant to speak. She seemed nervous, glancing over her shoulder, checking the time as if she had somewhere she urgently needed to be. Laura came to me about something that happened in 2018, she finally admitted. She said she couldn't remember it clearly, but she knew she'd seen something she wasn't supposed to. Something involving James. Something disturbing. She wouldn't say more, not without a warrant. But just before she left, she slipped Navarro a note, almost like she didn't want it on record. It read, "Look into the fund, Pioneer Initiative. That's where the bodies are buried." Whitmore had never heard of it. Neither had Navarro. A search of public records revealed nothing under that name. But in a private network tied to anonymous offshore accounts, there was one hit. A series of encrypted payments made over several years to James Simmons under that project title. The money trail led to a dummy corporation in Delaware, long dissolved. The paper trail ended there. But the timing of the payments? They matched perfectly with the contract James mentioned in the video. And just as the detectives were preparing to dive deeper into the financials, Whitmore's phone buzzed. It was an alert from facial recognition software they'd been running quietly in the background. Marcus Langley had just been spotted, walking out of a private residence in a gated community less than 20 miles from the Simmons house. Only one problem. That house belonged to someone very close to the case. Someone Navarro trusted. Someone who had access to the crime scene, the evidence, and the entire investigation. And that's when she realized. Someone on the inside wasn't just watching them. They were controlling everything. The discovery that Marcus Langley had been spotted leaving the home of someone inside the investigation sent a jolt through Navarro's veins, not just because it confirmed her growing suspicion that this case was being manipulated from within, but because that house, an elegant, secluded colonial tucked behind security gates, belonged to Chief Deputy Eleanor Strickland, a highly decorated officer, public-facing advocate for criminal justice reform, and Navarro's own mentor for the past 6 years. Strickland had personally assigned Navarro and Whitmore to the Simmons case. She had signed off on every warrant, reviewed every piece of submitted evidence, and even made public statements to the media about the department's commitment to uncovering the truth. And now Langley, an alleged corporate saboteur and a prime suspect, was walking casually out of her home like he was just another guest. Navarro didn't say anything at first. She needed more. Proof. A reason. Something that would make sense of the contradiction now boiling in her gut. But before she could even begin to put together her next move, the case twisted again, this time from an entirely new direction. Laura's sister, Megan Hayes, who had been unreachable since the incident, finally returned a call. She sounded anxious, breathless, and from the way she kept glancing around during the video call, it was obvious she didn't feel safe. Megan had been staying at a friend's cabin in upstate New York, claiming she needed time away from the media and police pressure. But what made her break the silence wasn't guilt or fear. It was a package she'd received, one that was never supposed to reach her. It had been forwarded from her old address, a place she hadn't lived in for over a year. No return label. Just her name written in blocky, typed letters. Inside was a small, tarnished key and a USB drive. When she plugged it into her laptop, she found dozens of PDF files, scans of emails, signed documents, and surveillance photos. At first glance, they seemed disconnected, but then Megan noticed James' name, then Laura's, and eventually her own. She had been copied on several internal communications about something called the Redbird Deployment Protocol, all dating back to 2018, the same year James had apparently signed that mysterious contract. Megan swore she didn't remember any of it. But her email address was on those documents, and so was a digital signature that matched her work login from her previous job at a defense subcontractor, an agency she had quietly left under murky terms. Navarro and Whitmore met with her in a neutral location hours later. Megan handed over the files, visibly shaken, and admitted that her departure from the subcontractor wasn't voluntary. She had been let go due to a breach of confidentiality. Someone had accessed restricted files using her credentials. At the time, she thought it was a mistake or a setup, but now she wasn't so sure. What if James had been the one who accessed those files? What if he used her credentials to gain access to something classified? That would explain the sudden cash flow. It would also explain the surveillance, the burner phone, the contract he regretted signing, and the increasing paranoia. But it didn't explain why someone had now dragged her back into the mess, unless she knew something without realizing it. While Navarro processed the files Megan brought in, Whitmore made a startling observation. One of the PDFs included coordinates, encrypted but crackable. Once decrypted, they pointed to a storage facility on the outskirts of town. The same facility where a unit under James' name had been quietly rented for nearly a year. The officers rushed there, hoping it might hold the missing contract, perhaps a backup drive, anything that could explain the maze they were stuck in. But when they arrived, the unit was already open, and inside, it had been burned from the inside out. A fire, isolated, clearly intentional, had destroyed nearly everything except for a charred metal case and part of a ceramic figurine that Laura had once posted about in an old social media photo. The cause? Accelerant. Accelerant that matched the kind used in arson cases tied to a string of unsolved tech facility break-ins across the state. As if the fire weren't enough, the investigation's momentum was slammed into a wall when they discovered that every backup Navarro had made of the stolen tablets files, video, logs, folder structure, was corrupted. Not just unreadable, but overwritten with bizarre code signatures that Whitmore believed were planted deliberately. Someone knew their workflow, their backup habits, their standard chain of custody, and they used it to scrub every last trace. They weren't just one step ahead. They were in the system, controlling what was seen, editing the narrative in real time. Navarro grew more distant, more methodical. The trust she once had in her team was eroding. She started cross-checking internal security clearances, data access logs, even internal phone calls, quietly and without drawing attention. That's when she found something she never expected. A flagged internal memo from Strickland's office, dated just 3 days after the initial welfare call. It was short and vague, but referenced the Pioneer Initiative, the same name Megan had connected to James' hidden payments. The memo mentioned containment protocols, media redirection, and, most alarmingly, intelligence asset exposure. Navarro read it 3 times before she believed her own eyes. This wasn't just a murder investigation. It was a cover-up. One that had started long before James Simmons ever picked up that tablet. And then came the twist that no one, especially Navarro, was ready for. A second video surfaced. Not from the tablet, and not from the burned storage unit, but from a hidden camera embedded in a smoke detector inside the Simmons hallway. A hacker from an independent cyber investigations group sent it anonymously to the station's tips inbox. The footage had no audio, but the visuals were clear. It showed James, 2 nights before everything fell apart, arguing with someone in the shadows of a hallway. The light caught just enough of the other person's face to make a partial match, and the algorithm pinged it within seconds. It wasn't Marcus Langley. It was Chief Deputy Eleanor Strickland. And she was holding the same black folder Navarro had only seen once, locked away in the department's restricted archives. The hallway camera cut out just as James stepped toward her, reaching for the folder, his mouth opening mid-sentence. But what happened next, the crucial few seconds that could unravel everything, was either deleted or never recorded. And now, with Strickland tied to the physical presence inside the house, the encrypted memo, and Langley's unexplained appearance, the web that once seemed to encircle James was beginning to close around someone else entirely. But the real question was no longer who was lying. It was, how many of them were? Navarro didn't sleep that night. Not even for a moment. The photo from the motel, proof that her safe place had never really been safe, sat on the table in front of her, weighted down by her badge. She stared at it for hours, trying to understand what it meant. Not just how someone had gotten in without tripping the door, bypassing the lock, slipping past her instincts, but what kind of power it took to do that so easily. Every time she replayed the case in her mind, she kept circling the same questions. Who really wanted James Simmons gone? And why had so many people tried to erase the evidence instead of seeking justice? But it wasn't until dawn that her mind finally landed on something she had forgotten entirely, something that didn't seem important before. In the video from the hallway camera, the one where Strickland was seen with James, there was a brief flash, a reflection in a photo frame near the doorway. It had always been blurry, insignificant. But in the light of everything that had happened, Navarro suddenly wondered what that reflection really was. She had the original copy pulled from evidence and enhanced through a private forensic analyst, off the record, using her own money. The image came back clearer. The reflection showed a third person standing just out of frame, watching. Not Langley, not Laura, not a stranger. It was Whitmore, her partner, the one who had been missing for days, the one who had sent her a message saying, "It's not safe." The man she trusted with her life had been standing in that hallway the same night James disappeared. He hadn't told her, hadn't filed it, hadn't even mentioned it once. And suddenly, all of Navarro's certainty collapsed into doubt. It didn't take long after that to pull his call logs, again, quietly, off the department record. There it was. Multiple calls to a blocked number the same night he went missing. But what really made her blood go cold was that same number appearing on one of the call sheets she'd recovered from James' hidden tablet. The same one supposedly erased, the one with the Plan B folder. And just like that, the story snapped. Not into clarity, but into a deeper level of deception. Whitmore wasn't missing. He had disappeared on purpose. That realization flipped everything upside down. Navarro had been chasing the wrong narrative. She thought they were uncovering a twisted plot, one rooted in James Simmons' past, in Laura's trauma, in Langley's betrayal. But what if the real target had never been James? What if James had discovered something, a secret so volatile, so valuable, that the moment he uncovered it, the people closest to him began choosing sides? And what if Whitmore, the man who had stood beside Navarro through every twist and dead end, had known the truth from the start? The more she searched, the deeper the betrayal sank. Years ago, before she ever met Whitmore, he'd served on a federal task force targeting corporate espionage, cybersecurity breaches, and rogue intelligence contractors. One of their biggest investigations had centered on a Black Ops program called Pioneer Initiative, the same name James had mentioned in his video, the same one buried in encrypted financial records. The operation had quietly collapsed under mysterious circumstances, and its digital trail was almost completely scrubbed, except for one final asset listed as embedded for monitoring. Whitmore. He hadn't just been investigating this case. He had been embedded inside it all along. Navarro's breath caught in her throat. Her thoughts spiraled. Had he been watching her the entire time? Guiding her, nudging her toward the right clues, but never the full picture? Was he the reason the tablet disappeared from evidence? Was he the one who let Langley walk away untouched? Every memory twisted into something darker. The long talks in the squad room. The shared doubts. The nights they spent poring over files together, thinking they were the only ones who cared enough to see the truth through. But the truth was, Whitmore hadn't gone missing. He had gone silent. Strategically. Intentionally. And now he was either working for the people who wanted the Pioneer Initiative buried, or trying to keep Navarro alive long enough for her to figure it out for herself. And just as she began connecting those final dots, her phone buzzed. A new message from an encrypted number. A video file. She hesitated before opening it. The screen blinked, flickered, and then showed Whitmore, sitting in a dark room, face bruised, eyes sunken. Behind him, Navarro recognized something shocking. The Simmons house. He was inside the crime scene again. And then he spoke. "I know you're watching this, Sarah. I don't know how much you've figured out yet, but you need to understand something. The case wasn't what it looked like. James didn't die because of what he did. He died because of what he tried to stop. And you're not just a detective anymore. You're a liability to them. They're coming for you next. Trust no one. Not even me." Then the feed cut to static, and the silence that followed was louder than any truth Navarro had heard so far. Navarro had never been one to rattle easily. Years on the force had trained her to suppress fear, compartmentalize it, and push through the chaos. But this case, this slow, creeping maze of lies and disappearances, was beginning to take something from her she didn't know could be lost: her sense of control. That night, long after the department had gone quiet and the city's noise had dulled into background static, she found herself sitting alone in her car outside her apartment, unable to bring herself to go inside. Something didn't feel right. Her front door looked untouched, her lights were off just like she left them. But there was a presence. Not a person, not a shadow, but a presence. A chill that gripped the back of her neck and reminded her of the moment right before something shatters. She made the decision to stay at a nearby motel, registering under an alias, using cash, switching off her phone. It was an instinctive move, one that she hadn't made since deep undercover days years ago. The paranoia wasn't just building, it was clawing at her now. Not long after midnight, she opened her laptop to check her secure case notes and found the cursor already blinking in the wrong place, inside a section she hadn't touched in hours. Then the screen flickered, and for a split second, a text document appeared and vanished. She tried to retrieve it, digging through the autosaves, but it was gone. All that remained was the file name in her recent activity log. "You're next." That's when it hit her. This wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was psychological warfare. And it worked. Her mind spiraled. Who had accessed her files? What did they know? Was it someone in the precinct? A ghost from James' past? Or worse, was it someone close, someone pretending to help? Navarro tried calling Whitmore, but it rang and rang. She texted. No reply. 30 minutes passed. Then 45. Finally, a message came through. "Not now. It's not safe." That was it. No context. No signature. Just that haunting phrase. She called again. Straight to voicemail. Then again. Still nothing. She considered the possibility that he was being cautious, just like her. But a darker thought gnawed at her gut. What if he wasn't being cautious at all? What if something had happened to him? Her pulse quickened as she pulled up his vehicle's GPS tracker, protocol for active partners, but something she'd never used until now. The last ping was from an alley behind an old courthouse 20 miles from town, an area they had no business being near. Navarro grabbed her badge, her sidearm, and drove, her thoughts racing faster than the tires on the wet asphalt. Every traffic light felt like a threat. Every passing headlight a signal. When she arrived, the alley was empty, the air damp and still. Whitmore's car was parked along the far wall, engine cold, driver's door ajar, and his phone lying on the passenger seat, screen cracked. But Whitmore wasn't there. Navarro swept the area, heart pounding against her ribs like a warning drum. No signs of struggle, no blood, no dropped weapon. Just silence. That was somehow worse. Because if something had happened to him, and he hadn't resisted, it meant whoever took him knew exactly how to approach. Knew how to make it clean, professional, silent. And that meant Navarro had underestimated them. Back at the precinct the next day, everything moved in slow motion. Strickland was absent. Her office locked. And when Navarro asked around, no one had seen her since the previous afternoon. Her official calendar claimed she was in meetings all day, but no one could confirm them. Whitmore was still missing, his home empty, his security camera feeds disabled. Navarro felt herself slowly being pushed to the edge, not just by the lack of answers, but by the creeping realization that she was being cut off, one thread at a time. Then came the breaking point. She returned to her desk to find an envelope with her name written in bold black ink. Inside, a single photograph. It showed Navarro asleep in the motel bed from the night before. Her weapon was visible on the nightstand. Her laptop screen glowed in the background. The shot was taken from inside the room. She dropped the photo, hands trembling for the first time in years. There was no note. No message. Just proof. Proof that she was being watched in the one place she believed she had escaped to. It wasn't just an invasion, it was a message. They weren't just warning her anymore. They were showing her how close they could get, how easily they could end it all. The case, her career, her life. She stumbled back to the bathroom, turned on the sink, and stared at herself in the mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, jaw clenched, pulse racing. She tried to piece it all together. The contract, the fake identities, the missing files, Langley's shadowy return, Megan's encrypted USB, the surveillance footage of Strickland in the hallway, and none of it made sense. It was too orchestrated, too controlled. The evidence didn't just disappear. It was being filtered, shaped, rewritten. And if they could do that, if they could erase people, forge documents, plant photos, then how much of what Navarro believed from the start was even real? The emotional weight sank in heavy. This wasn't about James Simmons anymore. Or even Laura. This wasn't about an isolated crime or a twisted betrayal. It was about something systemic. Bigger. Navarro wasn't chasing a killer. She was chasing a machine. One designed to stay hidden. One that was now staring directly at her. And maybe, just maybe, everything she had uncovered so far was only what she had been allowed to uncover. But if that was true, what was really being covered up? And who would vanish next before she could find out? Navarro stared at the frozen screen, Whitmore's final words echoing in her ears like the slow tick of a bomb she couldn't defuse. Trust no one. Not even me. The line kept looping in her head, spinning faster than her ability to process it. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a collapse of her entire reality. Every hour, every choice, every instinct she had trusted now sat under the weight of doubt. She felt the burn behind her eyes, the kind that signaled exhaustion far beyond the physical. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from the unbearable pressure of knowing that every step forward now meant risking everything, her career, her reputation, even her life. But it wasn't the fear of death that made her hesitate. It was the fear of finding out that the people she'd spent years standing beside might have been standing against her all along. By the time she returned to the precinct, the entire building felt different. Too quiet. Too still. Colleagues avoided her eyes, whispered in corners. Conversations stopped when she walked past. Files she once had open access to were suddenly locked behind authorization protocols. Something had shifted. Her name was on someone's list now. And deep down, she knew she was being watched, not just by outsiders but from within. Then came the final push. Internal Affairs requested a meeting. She was told it was routine, a review of her handling of the Simmons case. But there was nothing routine about the questions they asked. Why had she accessed Whitmore's personal call logs? Who gave her clearance to contact the off-record forensic analyst? What did she know about the missing USB drive from evidence lockup? Navarro answered carefully, walking the tightrope between cooperation and survival. She lied where she had to, redirected when she couldn't lie. But it was clear, they weren't just fishing. They were laying the groundwork for something bigger. They wanted her out of the way. That night, her options narrowed. She had to act fast, but any move could backfire. And that's when she made the hardest call of her life. She drove across town to an address she'd memorized but never used. Langley's safe house. The woman Navarro once considered an enemy now might be the only person who had more to lose than her. Laura Langley answered the door with cautious eyes and a loaded pistol in her hand. Navarro raised both palms and said just one thing: "They're coming after both of us." For a long moment, they stood in silence, memories and mistrust thick between them. Then Langley stepped aside and let her in. Inside, the air was tense. Navarro got straight to the point. She laid everything out. The reflection in the photo, the Pioneer Initiative connection, Whitmore's message, the missing evidence. Langley listened, her expression unreadable, then slowly pulled out a worn folder from a floorboard safe. Inside were printouts, timestamps, internal memos, all pointing to something Navarro hadn't seen before. A deeper program beneath Pioneer, codenamed Echo Black. It wasn't just surveillance. It was control. Targeted leaks, manipulated data streams, psychological manipulation. A network built to erase people without killing them, just destroy their lives so thoroughly that they disappear under the weight of suspicion and shame. James had discovered it by accident. Langley had helped him hide the evidence, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. And now, Navarro understood the full stakes. This wasn't about solving a murder. It was about exposing an operation that reached so far, so deep, that pulling on the wrong thread could unravel national security narratives, triggering retaliation that wouldn't come from criminals, but from the very institutions they were supposed to trust. And then came the ultimatum. Langley handed Navarro a burner phone and a number, someone inside the system who could help, but only under one condition. Navarro would have to go public with what she had before they did. There'd be no time to vet every detail, no chance to clean up loose ends. She'd have to risk everything on the strength of one story, one drop of truth against an ocean of lies. But once that line was crossed, there would be no way back. Navarro sat at the edge of a couch, staring at the number on the phone. Her career would be over. Her name would be dragged through the mud. The people she loved might be caught in the crossfire. And worst of all, she still didn't know for sure if Whitmore was playing both sides, or if he was the only person left trying to protect her from the inside. The weight of the decision pressed on her chest like a cinder block. She could walk away now, let the story disappear into whispers and rumors, bury the evidence, preserve what little of her life she still controlled. Or she could make the call and watch everything burn, and just as she began dialing, headlights cut through the window. Someone had found her. But was it the help Langley promised? Or the people sent to silence her for good? The lights outside didn't shut off. They stayed right there, idling in the dark like a predator waiting for its prey to flinch. Navarro didn't breathe. Neither did Langley. They both knew, if someone had tracked them here, the safe house was no longer safe. Navarro clutched the burner phone in one hand and her weapon in the other, moving silently toward the window. The engine purred, a low growl that felt like it was vibrating through her chest. And then the driver's side door opened. A shadow stepped out. Navarro squinted into the dark, her instincts ready to pull the trigger. But then, a familiar voice called her name. Quiet, cautious, shaking. It was Whitmore. He looked different now, shriveled by paranoia, unshaven, pale, wearing clothes 2 sizes too big. Like he'd been running for days. But it was him. Navarro yanked open the door and dragged him inside. He looked over his shoulder like the night itself might lunge at him. You were right, he whispered, breathless. It's not just Pioneer. Echo Black was Phase 1. They're onto something much bigger now. You think James was the target? He was just a test run. Navarro didn't understand. What are you talking about? Whitmore collapsed onto the couch, his voice ragged. They've been using the data, our data, to create behavior profiles so accurate they don't just predict what we'll do, they can manipulate us before we do it. Subtle nudges. Timed ads. Altered search results. Real-time surveillance that edits reality as we live it. You think you made a decision? You didn't. They made it feel like you did. He looked Navarro in the eye, broken and desperate. They have millions of these simulations running, and they've already started testing them on entire cities. One of them was James's hometown. Langley turned white. Navarro felt the floor tilt beneath her. Whitmore continued. That's why he cracked. He found his own digital replica, living a different version of his life, one where Laura never left, where his company succeeded. They were feeding it to him, showing it to him in pieces, like a dream. But it wasn't hope, it was leverage. They were seeing how much of his mind they could rewrite before he broke. Navarro could barely take it in. It wasn't just about surveillance or manipulation anymore. It was about control. Total, absolute control. Thought, memory, identity. But then came the part she hadn't seen coming. Whitmore's hands started to shake again. "I didn't come here just to warn you," he said. "I came here because I found out who turned you in, who flagged your search logs, who gave IA the green light to start building a case against you." Navarro stared. "Who?" Whitmore looked up, and his eyes landed on Langley. The silence was unbearable. Navarro turned slowly toward her, disbelief crawling up her spine. Langley didn't flinch. She just looked tired. Hollow. "It wasn't what you think," she said quietly. "They had my sister. She disappeared 5 years ago. They said if I didn't cooperate, she'd stay lost forever. They showed me footage, her tied to a chair in some abandoned facility. I had to keep you close. I had to make sure you didn't get too far ahead." "You've been feeding them my moves?" Navarro could barely speak. Langley nodded. "Only the small ones. Only the ones that wouldn't get you hurt. I was trying to keep you in the gray zone, where they wouldn't feel threatened. But then you found the QR code. You opened the archive. That changed everything." The rage that built inside Navarro was cold, not hot. The kind of fury that came from betrayal, so deep it didn't leave room for tears. She wanted to scream, to curse, to ask how Langley could look her in the eye all this time and pretend they were allies. But Whitmore interrupted. "It doesn't matter now. We're all in the crosshairs. Every trace of what we've uncovered is going to be wiped in the next 12 hours. They've already begun erasing identities, rewriting records. Anyone who knows anything is disappearing." Navarro paced, heart pounding. "Then we go public now. We leak everything. Video, audio, the whole archive." Langley stepped in, her voice desperate. "You don't get it. If we leak it, they'll say it's AI-generated disinformation. They'll flood the internet with so many fake versions of our story that no one will believe the real one. It's already happening. The only way to stop this is from the inside. Someone has to breach the source." Whitmore looked up, eyes red. "There's a node. Not digital. Physical. Buried inside the headquarters of a telecom company in Virginia. It's the control center for the simulations. If we can get in just long enough to pull the raw data, we can expose everything before they corrupt it." Navarro swallowed hard. The place he was talking about was supposed to be impenetrable. Surveillance on every level. Armed guards. Biometrics. But it was the only shot they had left. And they had less than half a day. There was no turning back now. If they failed, they wouldn't just disappear. They'd be rewritten. Their names, their faces, their entire histories would vanish. But if they succeeded, the world would never be the same. Navarro grabbed her gear, checked her weapon, and looked Whitmore in the eye. "Then let's take back the truth." Outside, the lights of another vehicle approached. And this time, it wasn't Whitmore. The roar of the second vehicle's engine shattered the tense silence, headlights cutting through the curtains like searchlights in a prison break. Navarro lunged toward the light switch and killed it, plunging the room into darkness. Langley was already pulling the safeties off her firearm, her face hardening into that calculated coldness Navarro had only seen once before, back when they were enemies. Whitmore ducked beneath the window, clutching the duffel bag filled with hard drives, burner phones, and what little remained of the stolen data they'd risked everything to collect. Outside, doors slammed. Footsteps, heavy and synchronized. Trained. Navarro knew immediately. This wasn't a raid. It was an extraction. Silent. Precise. Permanent. She whispered for Langley to follow, and they ducked into the back corridor, slipping out through the side exit that led down into the alley. Navarro's heartbeat was a war drum in her chest. Whitmore was slower, his breaths ragged, panic threatening to overtake him. But they couldn't stop now. Less than 9 hours remained before the data purge, before their identities, everything they'd uncovered, everything James had died for, would vanish. Their stolen vehicle was parked a few blocks away, hidden beneath an overpass. They ran like fugitives with nothing left to lose, past sleeping neighborhoods and blinking street cameras. Every camera that caught them was a risk. Every minute counted. By the time they reached the car, Navarro was already planning the route in her head. No highways, no license plate readers, no gas stations. Just a straight shot to Virginia. To the building that had quietly become the brainstem of an invisible empire. The compound was a fortress of steel and silence. What looked like a telecom hub on the surface was in fact a data control facility masked under a shell corporation registered to 4 different countries. Navarro knew this was suicide. But she also knew the only way to kill a ghost was to shine a spotlight on it before it slipped through the cracks. With forged credentials Langley had stored from her deep ops days, they got past the first layer of security posing as system auditors on a midnight shift, and identities verified only by the speed of their confidence. Once inside, the true nature of the place hit them. Windowless corridors, biometric-only vaults, walls covered in interactive panels displaying simulations Navarro couldn't even comprehend. She passed a glass room where a looping video played on mute, a digital replica of a politician giving a speech that never happened. In another room, faces were morphing on screens, citizens, influencers, judges, being edited in real time. They made it to the server chamber, a vault embedded 3 stories underground. There, in the humming glow of the core, Whitmore slid in the decryption tool and initiated the dump. Langley stood watch, her eyes never leaving the reinforced entrance. Navarro monitored the screen as lines of code unraveled like a living organism. Every document, every simulation, every manipulation tactic. Then the door behind them opened, and in walked someone Navarro never expected to see again. Captain Jordan Lacey, her old mentor. The man who taught her how to read lies off body language, who once pulled her out of a hostage situation with nothing but his voice and nerve. He was dressed not in tactical gear, but in a business suit that didn't belong to law enforcement. His hands weren't raised. His face wasn't angry. He looked calm. Pitying. "I warned you," he said quietly. "I told you not to look too deep." Navarro's gun was already up. "How long?" Lacey didn't blink. "Since before you even joined the force. Since the day they recruited me out of Quantico." Whitmore stood, stunned. "You were running this?" Lacey shook his head. "No. I was protecting it. And I still am." Navarro demanded to know why. Why help orchestrate something that weaponized truth, erased people, and reprogrammed reality like some dystopian fever dream? He sighed. Because reality is a war zone now. Misinformation spreads faster than any virus. Every election, every crisis, every mass shooting, it's all contaminated by digital noise. You think the public wants truth? No. They want confirmation. We just gave it to them. Langley stepped forward. By erasing real people? Destroying lives. AC looked at her, genuinely sad. You think they haven't done worse in the name of order? You think this is about power? No. It's about control. And you're risking the balance. Suddenly, alarms began flashing. Someone had triggered the breach protocol. They were out of time. Whitmore shouted. The data's dumping. We're 30 seconds out. But Lacey wasn't here to stop the upload. He raised his weapon, but not at Navarro. At Langley. I can't let her walk out of here, he said. She's the one who flagged the Pioneer QR code. She's the breach point. Navarro froze. What the hell are you talking about? Langley's silence said it all. She had known. Not just about the surveillance. Not just about her sister. She had activated the whole chain reaction. I didn't know they'd take James, she whispered. I didn't know they'd go that far. Navarro couldn't breathe. The betrayal ran deeper than she could have imagined. Whitmore reached for the data stick just as gunfire exploded through the room. In the chaos, Navarro dove, grabbing the drive, slamming the emergency evac button. Langley was hit, her leg. Lacey fell, not from a bullet, but from a sudden seizure. The implant in his head frying as the system overloaded. Then the sprinklers burst. The fire suppression foam filled the chamber. Sirens blared. Navarro grabbed Langley and the drive, dragging her through smoke and flashing lights as armed guards scrambled in confusion. They slipped into the evacuation tunnel, alarms chasing them the whole way. Outside, the sun was rising. They had the data. But the twist, the one Navarro didn't see coming, was waiting back at the safe house, left by Whitmore, who never made it out. A pre-recorded message, triggered by his biometric shutdown. He had built a failsafe. A second program, hidden within the data, one that would only unlock if Navarro exposed the first. It wasn't just about revealing the truth. It was about choosing what truth the world would believe. And now, Navarro had to decide. Which version of reality would she let live? The silence after it all ended was the loudest Navarro had ever known. Days had passed since the breach, since they uploaded the stolen data to public access nodes across 3 countries, triggering global headlines and triggering waves of skepticism, outrage, and fear. Overnight, the term Echo Black went viral. Social media platforms spun into chaos, flooded with debates, denials, and conspiracy theories. Some claimed it was deep fake propaganda. Others called it the single most important leak since Snowden. The Department of Justice issued a formal investigation, but the files had already reached millions. Navarro had hoped the truth would bring clarity. Instead, it had sparked a new kind of war, one not fought with bullets, but with narratives. The world didn't collapse, but something fundamental cracked. People began questioning everything: ads they saw, news they trusted, even conversations that felt a little too convenient. And in that fracture, something raw and uneasy was born: awareness. Langley survived, though their bond didn't. Navarro had left her in the hands of a quiet contact overseas, someone who could ensure she disappeared for good. There was no reconciliation, no dramatic goodbye. Just a mutual understanding that the damage between them was permanent. Whitmore's death was mourned quietly, a footnote in a digital storm he had helped unleash. His failsafe, the hidden program embedded in the data dump, remained locked, awaiting Navarro's activation code. She still hadn't used it. Maybe because part of her feared what else it might expose. Or maybe because she finally realized the truth didn't need a single voice to control it. It needed people brave enough to confront it, even when it made them question their own memories. The house she stayed in now was tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, off the grid, unreachable by satellites or street signs. She spent her mornings listening to wind rustling through pine trees and her nights watching the stars, something she hadn't done in years. The burner phones stayed silent. The world had moved on, as it always does, distracted by the next trending keyword, the next scandal, the next shiny thing designed to pull attention away from the uncomfortable. And yet, here and there, Navarro noticed things shifting. Journalists asking harder questions. Whistleblowers stepping forward. A quiet resistance forming under the surface. It wasn't revolution, but it was something. Then one morning, just as frost clung to the edge of her cabin's windows, a small envelope arrived. No stamp, no name, just a symbol drawn in black ink, the same one from the Pioneer QR code that had started it all. Inside was a single flash drive. No note, no instructions. Navarro stared at it for hours, her mind caught in the echo of every step that had led here. Every lie, every truth, every cost. She plugged it into her laptop that night. The screen flickered, then went black. A voice, familiar, low, steady, played through her speakers. It was Whitmore. A recording. If you're hearing this, it means the first layer of the simulation has collapsed. But there are more. You didn't just expose a system. You broke its rhythm. Now they're recalibrating, reshaping reality again. This isn't the end, Navarro. This is the reset. She didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid, but because for the first time, she understood that the battle wasn't about leaking files or crashing systems. It was about forcing the world to wake up, to think, to question. Every algorithm, every recommendation, every illusion of choice. The truth wasn't a destination. It was a process, one she had set into motion. When morning came, Navarro packed her things and walked out the front door. The world was waiting. Different now. Watching. Shifting. And somewhere out there, the next Navarro was already starting to ask the right questions. The truth was never lost. It was just waiting for someone brave enough to look. And now, maybe you will too.